reggelt! Nagyon büszke vagyok, hogy itt állok. Akarok egy pár szót mondani magyarul, mielőtt folytatom az angolul a beszédemet. Ahogy itt állok, visszagondolok arra, amikor kisfiú voltam 1956-ban, novemberben, mikor jöttek be az orosz tankok, és a papám látta, hogy valahogyan félek a jövőtől, valahogy nem sírtam, de valahogyan, ahogy álltam, az volt a kérdés nekem, hogy most mi lesz, mi lesz a jövőnk, hogy a forradalmat megverték. És a papám rám nézett, és azt mondta, tudod, egy dolgot kell megtanulni. Nem érdemes magyarnak lenni, ha nem mersz harcolni. Mert hogy Magyarország egy önálló ország legyen, az nem lesz csak automatikusan, ha mi nem harcolunk, és még ha néha, hogyha el is vesszük a harcot, az a fontos, hogy emberek lássák, hogy mi komolyan vesszük a mi kultúránkat, mi komolyan vesszük a mi érvünket, és emiatt nagyon fontos, hogy önálló ország akarunk lenni, hogy mindig legyünk készre arra, hogy harcoljunk. Most 62 évvel később már nem kell félni az orosz tankoktól, hogy bejönnek az orosz tankok, de ugyanakkor van egy más harc, ami szerintem épp olyan fontos, mint ami történt 62 évvel ezelőtt. Ma az új harcok, a kultúrharcok, a kultúrháború, az a legfontosabb dolgokról szól. Az arról szól, hogy miben hiszünk, mi a mi érvünk. Az arról szól például, hogy lehetünk egy önálló ország, aki képes önállóan gondolkozni, hogy milyen fajta jövőt akar építeni magának. Lehet arról szó, hogy Magyarország egy önálló ország, aki elhatározza, hogy neveli fel a fiatalságot. Hogy neveli fel, milyen értékekkel neveljük fel a fiatalokat, amit mi határozunk el, nem valaki más Amerikába vagy Brusselsba. És én szerintem ez a harc, ez a kultúrharc, az épp annyira fontos, hogy megnyerjük, mert a jövőnk ezen függ. Mint egy önálló ország, egy önálló kultúrából azon függ, hogy ezt a harcot belépünk, és megmondjuk, hogy mit gondolunk, és végül is megnyerjük. Oké, megyek angolul beszélni. Egy kicsit. The European culture war, or the Kulturkampf, is really interesting. And the reason why it's very interesting is because unlike the Kulturkampf that Bismarck fought in the 19th century, it seems that the war and the conflict is about very little things, very trivial matters. It's not about big civilizational issues. That's the way it seems at first, because the way that I look at it is that the battles of today begin in the nurseries. It already begins with trying to influence how young children think. The battle continues on in schools, goes on in universities, and ultimately it becomes a question of what is it, what kind of values do we want young people, what kind of values do we want people in our society to live by? What are the fundamental principles about what is right and wrong that should influence the way we live? And it seems to me that when you look around Europe, you find that the situation is extremely troublesome. Take, for example, the situation in Scotland. In Scotland, there's a new rule that the government has brought in, which says that teachers in primary school do not have to tell parents if the children, as young as 5 or 6, decide to change their gender. So you have a situation in Scotland where the teachers are aware of the fact that little Mary has become little Johnny, or little Johnny has become little Mary, and that's not the business of the parents. The parents need not find out about that later on. Worse still, the report published by the Scottish government suggests that if the teachers find that if any parents are struggling with the child to change their gender, in other words, they're not very happy about the fact that Mary has become Johnny and Johnny has become Mary, then the teachers can report that parent to the local authorities so they can, I would imagine, get re-educated. And it seems to me that this kind of attack and disruption on family life is ultimately about a very fundamental question, a question that's foundational to European civilization, which is, do we believe in the authority of the parent? Does the parent have authority over the education and the welfare and the future of a child? And that's being attacked left and right. So, for example, one of the questions that I find very curious, and I've been arguing this in Europe, is a lot of people are arguing that it is wrong for parents to have the right to indoctrinate, and use the word indoctrinate, their child with their religion. So, for example, in their eyes, a lot of people say that if I, as a Catholic person, or a Protestant person, or a Jewish person, make sure that my child follows my religion, I'm really being very authoritarian. And not only being very authoritarian, some people argue that if you do that, that's a form of child abuse. For example, one of the most vociferous proponents of atheism, Richard Dawkins, has said that as odious as the physical abuse of children by priests undoubtedly is, I suspect that it may do them less damage than the mental abuse of having been brought up Catholic in the first place. In other words, if you as a mother and a father want your child to be the same religion that you were born into, and you don't wait until your child is 21, but from a very early age onward, teach them your religion, that is not considered by some people in the globalist, federalist world in Europe as a kind of child abuse. I was really struck by how arrogant the culture war has become. I don't know if you heard, but in Iceland, progressive Iceland, we have a situation where a progressive party member of the Icelandic parliament is leading a campaign against the right of Jewish people and Muslim people to circumcise their children. In her eyes, the age-old ritual of circumcising your child is not seen as a form of child abuse. And when somebody said, well, how about people's religious freedom? How about people's ability to practice their religion? And the ritual of circumcision is part of that. How about that? She says, well, the freedom of religion is not nearly as important as the right of the child. And of course, what she meant by that is not the right of the child, because children having got rights that they can exercise, is my ability to tell you what the right of that particular child is. Now you might ask, why am I spending so much time talking about these little things, about parents and children, about religion? You know, why waste time when we have these big questions of Europe to talk about? Well, the reason why I think we have to begin there at the ordinary, everyday issues is because the little values that affect our life in a very fundamental sense are ultimately leading up to the questioning of some of the most important things that you and I take very seriously. Most important of all, the right to self-determination, whether it's self-determination of the parent to determine the future of their child, or national self-determination, something that we call sovereignty. Every time I go and debate people who have this kind of globalist, federalist imagination, and I talk about sovereignty, they look at me as if I'm an idiot. How could you believe in sovereignty? We live in a globalized world. They tell me that borders do not matter. Borders are 19th century. They're not really important anymore. You have a situation where we have basically a Kulturkampf that's being waged against sovereignty, against the idea of a nation, against the idea of the border. In fact, I've been studying the speeches of Claude Juncker, the president of the European Commission, who seems to think that if you still believe in national sensibility, if you still believe in the idea of a border being important, within which citizens exercise their democratic rights, if you still believe that, then you are a populist. And the word populist, or what I call the P word, has now been used fairly routinely to describe anybody who dares challenge the kind of federalist consensus that's becoming institutionalized and mainstreamed throughout Western Europe in a very kind of fundamental way. And basically, European Union policymakers often give the impression that they believe that national loyalties are an outdated prejudice. They believe that if you're attached to a particular culture and you are not taking part in the cosmopolitan worldview, you're almost fascistic, you're reactionary as a result of that. And in particular, what they seem to believe is that if you think a border is important, if you take your borders seriously, then you must be suffering from some 18th or 19th century kind of fantasy and illusion. And ultimately, and this is, I think, where the migration question is so important. It's not the migrants, to me, that's important. What's important is that by emphasizing the irrelevance of the border, by telling us that it doesn't matter who comes in and out, what they are really saying is that the status of a citizen does not matter. It devalues the meaning of being a citizen in your own country, because it basically says that even though you and your family and your grandparents and your ancestors have lived in the same place and have created a world within your own culture, that doesn't give you any privilege over anybody, any Tom, Dick, and Harry who happens to have come into your country 2 minutes ago. In their eyes, it's pretty much the same thing. And I think that, to me, is a very dangerous development. I've been very interested in a phenomenon I call Magyar phobia, or Hungarian phobia. And it's interesting because in Brussels, they love talking about phobias. They like, talk homophobia, xenophobia, dysphoria. But the one phobia they very rarely talk about is the one that they've been, in a sense, experimenting with, is their hatred of many aspects of Hungarian culture. And at first, I couldn't really understand that. I mean, I became very interested in why it was that every time I open up a newspaper in the Western media, the stories about Hungary come across as if it's like a day before Kristallnacht, as if we're just about to sort of begin World War III, and Hungary is this horrible sort of place. I couldn't understand where this Magyar phobia kind of comes from. And then I began to look at this and explore what is it that kind of creates this kind of impression. And I think it's really summed up by the fact that from the Brussels point of view, the fundamental law of Hungary, particularly its avowal of national faith, represents for them an unwelcome throwback to what they call the irrational pre-modern past. And from their point of view, it's a problem when, first of all, you believe in your national heritage, but even worse, if you try to fuse together nationhood and faith. That is somehow seen as being sort of unacceptable. And in particular, what they really don't like about Hungary, and in many respects of all the Visegrad countries, is that in these societies, there still is an unapologetic celebration of national loyalty. In their eyes, this is seen as something of a cultural crime, something that is totally unacceptable. And the preference of the European federalist intellectuals for a denationalized form of civic identity is almost the polar opposite of what the fundamental law is really all about. It seems to me that it's really important to point out that the conflict between Hungary and Brussels, the criticisms leveled at Hungary, are really just one variant of this global, Europe-wide struggle against populism. Because I think all of us are populist in their eyes. Anybody who dares questions the cosmopolitan culture in Brussels is ipso facto, by definition, an enemy from this particular point of view. Has God spoken to me, or sort of, right? I'm not really sure, sort of. I hope I didn't say anything bad, sort of. I want to basically look at and end on one final point, which is I find to be really quite interesting. In the European Union, the fundamental value of the European Union these days is what they call diversity. They love diversity. If you go to Brussels and you look at a European Commission statement, it will begin with the D word, diversity, and will go on about how much we celebrate diversity. And in Europe, they celebrate diversity. They love diversity, like the diversity of genders, the diversity of identities. They love the diversity of different minority groups, the diversity of regional groups. And you would think that, in their eyes, diversity by definition is a good thing, except for one thing, which is for some strange reason, the celebration of diversity does not extend into celebrating the diversity of nations. It's strange because the European Union began its life in the 50s by saying that we are celebrating the diversity of European nations. Today, national identity is the one identity that you're not allowed to have. National identity is the one identity that's criticized and questioned and made fun of. Every identity is okay, but if you say I'm Hungarian and I'm proud, that's seen as somehow unpleasant, somehow an indication of a negative kind of development. And it seems to me that what that tells us is that this diversity culture is actually not about celebrating diversity, but the aim of diversity in Europe is to denationalize European culture. I think the principal question in the European culture war today is whether we have identities that are denationalized. In other words, we're kind of detached from our national past, or alternatively, whether we're proud and able to enjoy the sensibility of nationhood, able to live our life as Hungarians or as Poles or as Slovaks or as Czechs. That's what it's really ultimately about. And we are called often populists for taking our nationhood seriously. But to me, being a populist is a badge that I wear proudly. If they want to call me a populist, I'm quite happy to be a populist, because in my eyes, what that means is standing up for the values in the culture war that are absolutely important for the future of Europe. You see, the thing that I want to end on is basically to insist that despite the fact that the V4 countries, and Hungary in particular, are often regarded as troublemakers within the European context, the way that I look at it is that we, the people in this room, and people who think the way we do, we are the real Europeans. I mean, we are not just fighting for Hungary, or Poland, or Slovakia, or the Czech Republic. We are fighting for the future of Europe. And one thing that we recognize very, very clearly is that if Europe is going to have a future, if Europe is going to have a genuine future in the world ahead, then we in Europe have got to learn from our past and take the legacy and our heritages from the past very, very seriously. Thank you.